The evening began as usual. I was brewing chamomile tea in the kitchen, inhaling its soothing aroma, and listening to the faint hum of the television in the living room. The house was settling into its familiar silence, broken only by the occasional sounds drifting in from outside. Nathan, as always, was working late, and I had grown accustomed to these long evenings alone. Our suburban Los Angeles home felt both cozy and empty at the same time. When the doorbell rang, I startled slightly. Unexpected visitors were rare in our house. Approaching the door, I paused for a moment, my hand resting on the handle as I tried to recall if I was expecting anyone. But no, I opened the door and there he was, a young man with a travel bag slung over his shoulder. Aunt Savannah? He greeted me with a slightly bashful smile, but there was a spark in his eyes that immediately caught my attention. Hi, I'm Aiden. You probably weren't expecting me? I froze for a moment, trying to piece together what was happening. Oh, right, Nathan's nephew. He had mentioned Aiden's visit a couple of weeks ago, but I had completely forgotten about it. Aiden! Of course, come in, I said warmly, stepping aside to let him in. You must be tired from the journey. Aiden entered, his presence surprisingly mature for a 20-year-old. Tall, lean, with a casual ease in his movements and that youthful energy that can't be faked. He set his bag down near the door, glancing around. Nice house, he remarked, his voice deep, with a faint undertone of shyness. Thank you, I replied, feeling an unexpected warmth at his words. Are you hungry? I can make something for you. No, I'm fine, he said with a smile. Just let me know where I can settle in without being in the way. I plan to work on some internship projects. Trying to appear nonchalant, I directed him to Nathan's office. You'll be comfortable there. It's quiet and no one will disturb you. Aiden nodded, thanked me, and headed upstairs, leaving behind a sense of lightness, like a sudden gust of fresh air in the monotony of life. Returning to the kitchen to finish my tea, I noticed I couldn't stop thinking about his smile. There was something special in his eyes. Later that evening, when Nathan finally came home, I told him about Aiden's arrival. It's good that he's here, Nathan said, pouring himself a glass of wine. He could use the support. Please, take care of him while he's staying here. He's young, he might feel awkward. I nodded, but there was the same detachment in Nathan's tone as always. For him, it was a matter of duty and responsibility. But for me, I suddenly realized his request evoked a very different feeling, light and tingling excitement. The next day, Aiden came downstairs with a book in hand. He looked so at ease sitting in the living room that I decided to join him. You've got interesting reading material, I said, glancing over his shoulder. He looked up at me with a slight smile. Yeah, it's for the internship, but honestly, it's dull. I'd rather be reading something more literary. Like what? I raised an eyebrow, sitting across from him. I don't know, something like Hemingway or Fitzgerald, stories about people, their flaws. His words unexpectedly struck a chord in me. We kept talking, and I realized how easy it was to converse with him. He wasn't just young and energetic, he was smart, observant. His genuine curiosity about the world stood in stark contrast to Nathan's usual restraint. At some point, I noticed my glances lingering a bit too long, and his smile appearing too often. When he accidentally brushed my hand while passing me the book, my heart beat just a little faster. I quickly pulled back, pretending nothing had happened, but something had shifted in the air between us. Something invisible yet palpable. That evening, as I climbed the stairs to the bedroom, I realized I had been thinking about him for far too long. His youth, his confidence, and his gentle naivety had suddenly become strangely captivating. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, something told me it wasn't quite so simple. The next morning, I woke up with an unusual feeling. The previous evening, and my conversation with Aiden, had somehow lodged firmly in my mind. I tried to brush off these thoughts, telling myself that his youth and the lightness of his character had simply brightened up my otherwise routine day. Descending to the kitchen, I began preparing breakfast. From the living room came the soft sound of a page turning. Peeking in, I saw Aiden sitting in an armchair with a book. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating his face. He looked so focused, and I suddenly felt the urge to join him. "What are you reading?" I asked, stepping into the room and casually sitting on the couch, pretending nonchalance. He looked up and smiled, holding up the cover. It was some kind of academic book that instantly made me feel worlds apart from his interests. "For the internship, not the most exciting, but useful," he said, closing the book. "What about you? What do you like to read?" "Oh, I tend to gravitate toward fiction. I guess it's my love of stories. They always reveal something about people we might overlook in everyday life." Our conversation smoothly transitioned to discussing favorite authors and then movies. Aiden spoke with such enthusiasm that I found myself hanging on to his every word. When he talked about his dreams and ambitions, his eyes lit up with a spark that was contagious, and I felt drawn into the vibrancy he seemed to embody. At one point, as I brushed my hair back, I noticed his gaze linger briefly on my hands. It was almost imperceptible, but enough to make me feel a strange warmth, a quiet sense of satisfaction. I couldn't pinpoint its source. Maybe it was just the realization that I hadn't felt noticed in a long time. That evening, as usual, Nathan was busy with work. His career had become his life, and I had grown used to the solitude that accompanied our evenings. I prepared a light dinner, and when Aiden and I found ourselves in the living room again, an idea crossed my mind. Something out of the ordinary. "Would you like a glass of wine?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual, though the suggestion felt bold even to me. He looked surprised but nodded. "Why not?" I brought over 2 glasses and a bottle, setting them on the coffee table. We sat on the couch, and our conversation resumed. Light, easy, yet with a growing tension that I couldn't quite place. His voice seemed deeper than it had during the day, his glances just a bit longer than they should be. Or perhaps I was searching for something in them, something more. When he leaned forward to pick up his glass, our hands brushed against each other. It was a fleeting moment, but it seemed to resonate in the air. I looked at him, and he looked back at me. His face grew more serious, as though he too sensed that this moment was more than mere coincidence. Before I could fully process what was happening, he leaned in. His lips gently touched mine, and a surge of electricity ran through me. It was so unexpected, and yet felt so right. I don't know who pulled away first, him or me, but in the next moment, I saw his face flush with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, I don't know what came over me," he stammered, quickly getting up from the couch. I I should go." I didn't even have time to respond. He disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone. My heart was racing, and I was struggling to make sense of what had just happened. Sitting in the silence, I tried to rationalize it. It was a mistake, nothing more. But deep down, I knew. This kiss couldn't simply be undone. It had happened. It was real. And with it came something I hadn't felt in a long time. A flutter of excitement. That night, I struggled to fall asleep. His eyes, his voice, his touch, all of it played on a loop in my mind. It reminded me that I was still alive and that perhaps I had forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen. The next morning, I woke up with a vivid recollection of the previous evening. That kiss, though brief, wouldn't let me go. I tried to rationalize it. It was unexpected, accidental, insignificant. But every time I replayed that moment in my mind, it became clear that it was far from accidental. It felt like a sign, awakening emotions I had been hiding for so long. I kept telling myself that nothing serious had happened. After all, we were just 2 people caught in an awkward situation. Yet, deep down, I knew it wasn't just about awkwardness. That kiss had uncovered something I had been ignoring. Monotony, ordinariness, longing. Not a lack of love for Nathan exactly, but rather the absence of it, like lukewarm water that no longer warms you. Aiden acted strangely the next day. He avoided meeting my gaze, as if afraid I would bring up what happened. We exchanged only the most basic words over breakfast, but I noticed how his eyes would skim past me without lingering. Still, I could sense his presence, more deliberate than before. He kept walking by, staying within sight, even when pretending to be busy. It was a game we both understood, but neither dared to acknowledge. I couldn't just let it go. It was as if something inside me had switched on, demanding to test the limits. It was like I wanted to find out. Was this just fleeting tension, or was it something more? I started choosing my clothes more carefully. Simple cotton dresses gave way to fitted skirts and blouses with subtle necklines. Nothing overtly provocative, just details that could be read between the lines. I noticed how his gaze lingered on me occasionally, and that look was fuel to my inner fire. One day, I went out to the garden to tend to the flowers. It was my usual way of distracting myself from overthinking, but this time, things went differently. I bent down to trim the rose bushes when I heard footsteps. It was him. "Need any help?" Aiden asked, his tone slightly shy, but tinged with interest. I turned around, trying to hide my unexpected excitement. He stood there, hands in his jeans pockets, looking so nonchalant that it irritated me for some reason, as if everything that happened mattered only to me. "If you want, you can hold the pruners," I replied, striving to sound casual. He stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of his cologne, something fresh and citrusy, cutting through the scent of the flowers around us. We began working together, and the moment felt strangely intimate. Not because we were standing close, but because of how effortlessly the conversation flowed. We talked about everything except us: books, movies, even trivial things like which coffee was better. Yet I felt the atmosphere between us thickening. His hand brushed against mine as he passed me a tool, and that fleeting contact sent a jolt through me. "Aunt Savannah, do you always work this much in the garden?" he asked, grinning. It was an ordinary question, but his tone carried a hint of something more. Or maybe I was imagining it. "Only when I need a distraction," I replied, looking him directly in the eyes. That phrase seemed to catch him off guard. He paused for a second before continuing his work as if nothing had happened. But I noticed his breathing deepened slightly, and his movements became just a bit clumsier. The tension between us was becoming almost tangible. When the work was done, I stepped back to survey what we'd accomplished. Aiden was still standing nearby, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Not bad," he remarked, glancing at the bushes. "Yeah, I think we did well," I said, looking at him instead of the flowers. For a moment, our eyes locked. It was like a challenge neither of us wanted to accept, but neither was willing to lose. The tension built to the point where I knew, if we stayed there a minute longer, something would happen that I wasn't ready to explain, even to myself. "Thanks for your help," I said quickly, turning and heading back to the house. When I closed the door behind me, I could feel my heart racing. I realized that kiss was only the beginning, and now the situation was slipping out of my control. The idea of inviting Aiden into town came to me spontaneously, or perhaps I was fooling myself, trying to believe it wasn't a premeditated plan. That morning, I walked into the living room where he sat with his laptop, his gaze focused on the screen. "Aiden, how about a little outing today?" I asked, attempting to keep my voice casual. "I need to run a few errands, and it'd be dull going alone." He looked up, clearly surprised by the suggestion, but his face quickly softened into a warm smile. "Why not? I've been looking for an excuse to get out of the house anyway." We drove to town in my car, and the journey passed effortlessly. His conversation was genuine, almost childlike in its openness. He talked about his plans for an internship, the challenge of finding one's place in a world where great things are expected of you. I nodded, listening, but an unfamiliar feeling grew inside me. His words seemed to touch something deeply personal, a part of me I had hidden even from myself. The day turned out to be unexpectedly fun. We laughed, commented on passers-by, and he even helped me choose items, suggesting things that were either extravagant or outright absurd. At one point, I caught myself thinking this felt like a date. Not a real one, of course, but the lightheartedness, the ease, and the attention he gave me made me feel younger, more desirable. On the way back, the mood shifted abruptly. He stared out the window while I drove in silence. The atmosphere, so light and lively earlier, now felt like a taut string. I sensed we were both avoiding the obvious, that something more was happening between us than just a casual outing. When we got home, I parked the car in the garage, ready to end the day with a polite farewell. But instead, I found myself saying, "Would you like to come in for coffee?" Aiden looked up, and I caught a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. He lingered for a moment, as if debating whether this was the right thing to do, then nodded. Why not? We entered the kitchen, and while I brewed coffee, he stood by the table watching me. I tried not to think about how close he was, but every second of his presence felt amplified. When I handed him his cup, our fingers accidentally brushed. I pulled my hand back too quickly, scolding myself for the unnecessary nervousness. The conversation began with familiar topics. He asked how I met Nathan, and I recounted the early years of our marriage when everything seemed perfect. Then we transitioned to family and expectations. He shared how hard it was to live up to others' hopes. "It feels like you're supposed to be someone you don't want to be," he said, staring thoughtfully at his cup. "And even when you do something well, it still doesn't feel like enough." I nodded. His words resonated too much. "You talk as if you're undervaluing yourself," I said. "But the truth is, you're so much more than you think." The words slipped out before I could stop them. He looked up, his gaze intense, as if he was trying to read me completely. In that moment, the air between us felt almost still. When he stood to leave, the sense of something unfinished lingered. He hesitated, as if wanting to say something, but then turned toward the door. I acted without thinking. "Aiden," I said softly, stepping forward and touching his shoulder. He turned back, and I saw the same hesitation in his eyes that I felt within myself. But this time, I couldn't back away. I moved closer, and he didn't step aside. Our eyes locked, and moments later, I felt his lips on mine. This kiss was different. If the first had been an accident, this one was deliberate. It was deep, filled with a tension that sent shivers through me. It wasn't a mistake or confusion, it was desire. But the moment didn't last. We both pulled away abruptly, as if someone might walk in on us. He apologized immediately, his voice shaky. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" I interrupted him. "It's okay, Aiden, just go." He nodded and disappeared upstairs. I stood alone in the kitchen, feeling my legs tremble beneath me. I knew we had crossed a line from which there was no turning back. And that scared me more than anything. After that evening in the kitchen, my interactions with Aiden began to resemble a dance. Cautious, yet filled with unspoken meaning. We rarely exchanged words, but every glance, every gesture, carried a quiet symphony of tension. When he entered a room, I could feel his presence electrify the space. I caught myself choosing outfits that subtly highlighted my features, while remaining within the bounds of propriety. It was a kind of game, one we both understood but never acknowledged. Nathan, as usual, noticed nothing. He came home late, exhausted and engrossed in his work, believing our marriage was comfortably coasting along its usual tracks. However, my friends started asking questions. "You look like you've won the lottery," one of them said over lunch. "What's going on? A new diet? Or something else?" I would just smile and joke it off, but inside, I felt uneasy. The joy, the newfound liveliness I was experiencing, had become too obvious. Yet how could I hide the way I had started feeling like a woman again? Aiden, too, had changed. He began acting bolder, as if testing the boundaries of how far he could go. At first, his compliments were innocent, almost offhand. "That's a lovely color on you," he remarked one morning in passing. But over time, they grew more personal. Do you always put so much thought into your accessories? It really enhances your style. Each comment hit its mark, sending a warm wave of satisfaction through me. It wasn't just attention, it was admiration. He noticed things about me that I had long since stopped noticing myself. We started finding each other more often by chance. He'd pass by, letting his gaze linger just a bit too long. I'd accidentally brush his hand while handing him something. Our conversations remained neutral, but between us, there was always something unspoken. And each time our paths crossed, I felt a strange mix of fear and longing swell in my chest. One evening, while Nathan was working late again, Aiden and I found ourselves in the kitchen. I was preparing dinner when he came over to help. I noticed his hand tremble slightly as he handed me a knife. Our fingers brushed once more, and I saw the same fire in his eyes that I felt burning inside myself. "You're always so deft with knives," he said with a light smile, trying to diffuse the tension. "It's years of practice," I replied, smiling back. But his gaze didn't leave my face. This was more than just a smile. In that moment, I knew he wanted to say something more. His voice softened to a near whisper. "Savannah, you know this isn't just nothing to me, right?" I froze. His words were so unexpected, so raw, that for a moment I was at a loss for words. I turned to him, setting the knife on the counter. He looked at me with an intensity that seemed to hold all the tension we had both tried so hard to suppress. He stepped closer, shrinking the space between us. I felt his hand gently brush against mine. His touch was warm, tender, yet charged with desire. His voice was low, almost trembling. "I know this is wrong, but I can't ignore it." I stood there, rooted to the spot. His closeness was intoxicating, yet inside, I was torn between two forces, the desire that screamed and the remnants of reason that begged me to stop. I took a step back, creating a sliver of distance to regain control. "Aiden," I said softly, avoiding his gaze, "this has gone too far. We can't." He stopped, lowering his hand. In his eyes, I saw a mix of disappointment and understanding. He nodded, saying nothing more, and walked out of the kitchen. I was left alone, my hands trembling. That moment made me realize how fragile the boundary was, the one we had worked so hard to maintain. But I knew this couldn't go on for much longer. One day, one of us would stop holding back. When Nathan announced he was leaving for a 3-day business trip, I felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. His absence always brought a certain quiet to the house, but this time, that silence held the potential to transform into something far more significant. I tried not to dwell on it, but when evening came and I was alone with Aiden, the tension in the air became almost tangible. "Maybe we could cook dinner together?" I suggested, keeping my tone light, as if it were an ordinary offer. Aiden looked up from his book and nodded, his smile slightly strained, but his eyes conveying that he understood the subtext. We headed to the kitchen, and immediately the air between us seemed to shift. We cooked in silence, but it wasn't a comfortable silence. It was heavy with the unspoken, with the awareness that each of us was afraid to say too much. I felt his presence so acutely, it was as though he stood closer than he actually was. Every time our hands brushed accidentally, I found myself holding my breath. "You're doing pretty well," I said, trying to break the tension as he chopped vegetables. "It's simple. I had a good teacher," he replied, smiling but avoiding my eyes. We continued cooking, our glances meeting more and more frequently. The tension grew steadily, and I made no effort to diffuse it. Maybe I didn't even want to. When dinner was ready, we sat down at the table. We talked about ordinary things, his plans for his internship, books, movies. But every look, every word carried an undertone we couldn't acknowledge. It was a game that drained me, yet one I couldn't walk away from. After dinner, I got up to clear the plates and felt the fabric of my dress cling to my skin. There was a small stain from the sauce, right at my waist. I tried to rub it off, but the motion only made it more noticeable. "You've got a stain there," Aiden said, noticing it. "Here, let me help." I froze as he stepped closer. His fingers brushed the fabric of my dress lightly, and a shiver ran down my spine. The gesture was innocent, but the tension it carried was anything but. He looked up, and our eyes met. In that moment, I saw what I had been trying to ignore for days, a desire that left no room for doubt. His hand lingered at my waist, and that touch conveyed more than any words could. I didn't step back. I couldn't. He moved closer, closing the distance between us. His lips found mine again, but this time, it wasn't just a kiss. His hands slid up, encircling me, and I felt a wave of emotion I had been suppressing for so long crash over me. The kiss was deep, raw, almost painfully intense. I let myself dissolve into the moment, forgetting everything but the feel of his touch. When we finally pulled apart, his eyes were alight with something I couldn't ignore. He didn't say a word, but his expression told me he understood. There was no going back now. I lowered my gaze, struggling to gather my thoughts. I knew it was wrong, but I also knew something else. It had been inevitable. This wasn't just a fleeting flirtation, not some passing infatuation. This was a connection that had grown too strong to deny. "Savannah," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I can't pretend anymore." I looked up at him but didn't respond. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because words felt meaningless. Everything had already been said through our actions. I turned and left the kitchen, my legs trembling. He didn't follow me, but I knew this was only the beginning. We had crossed a line, one we couldn't uncross. That night, I lay in bed for hours, unable to sleep, realizing that this connection was no longer an accident. It had become a part of me, and now I didn't know how to handle it. The morning was sunny and calm, but inside me, tension was boiling. The past few days, filled with glances, touches, and the crushing realization that I could no longer ignore my feelings, had turned into a series of sleepless nights. I knew I had to take a step, even if it felt like stepping into an abyss. "Nathan, I'll take Aiden to the university," I said over breakfast, trying to sound casual. "He mentioned he needed to wrap up some paperwork." "Great," my husband replied, barely looking up from his phone. "Thanks for taking care of that." When Nathan left, I lingered in front of the mirror, adjusting my hair and carefully choosing my outfit. It had to be something simple, yet elegant. I wanted to look beautiful, but not too obvious. Satisfied with the result, I headed to the car, where Aiden was already waiting. His eyes lingered on me for a moment, and something in his gaze sent a slight shiver through me. "Ready?" I asked, smiling as though there was nothing unusual about my suggestion. "Always," he replied, and we drove off. The drive to the university ended before it even began. Instead, I took a turn onto the highway leading to the neighboring town. "Are we sure this is the right way?" Aiden asked with a smile. "A little detour won't hurt," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. We stopped at a small restaurant overlooking an old square. It was quiet and cozy, hidden from view, as if designed for moments like this. We chose a table by the window, and as the waiter brought the menus, I noticed Aiden relaxing. He looked almost happy, and it had a calming effect on me. "Do you come here often?" he asked, glancing at the menu. "Number, I just thought we both needed a change of scenery." He looked up, and there was something in his eyes that made me hold my breath for a second. "Thank you for this," he said softly. "Sometimes it feels like I forget what it's like to just be myself." His words struck a chord in me. It was a truth I couldn't ignore. We were both trapped in worlds where no one truly saw us for who we were. When the food arrived, the conversation turned more personal. Aiden opened up about his fears, about the difficulty of meeting his family's expectations. His voice was gentle, but there was an undercurrent of pain. "Sometimes it feels like I'm just going through the motions, not really living," he admitted. I nodded, my eyes fixed on my plate. I know what that's like. Being with someone who loves you but doesn't see you. Feeling like a part of something, but never a whole person. He looked at me with an understanding that dissolved the last barrier between us. His silence said more than words ever could. After lunch, I suggested we drive along the coast. The highway wound its way, revealing views of the ocean sparkling in the sunlight. Aiden was quiet, but his gaze showed he was savoring the moment. Let's stop here, I said, spotting a small parking area by the cliff. We got out, and I inhaled the fresh, salty air. Nearby, a path led down to the beach. I started walking, not looking back, but I could hear Aiden's footsteps behind me. When we reached the sand, I slipped off my shoes, feeling the cool grains against my feet. Aiden did the same, and we began strolling along the water's edge. We didn't speak, but the silence felt natural. I could sense him beside me, his warm presence. Stopping, I gazed out at the ocean. Aiden stepped closer, and I felt his eyes on me. I turned, and our eyes met. Savannah? His voice was quiet but firm. You're driving me crazy. His words felt like a confession I couldn't dismiss. He was standing so close I could feel his breath. I didn't respond. I just looked at him, letting him see that I felt the same. The moment stretched, and I realized there was no point in pretending anymore. In that instant, it was just us, and nothing else mattered. The drive home after our day away from the familiar routine was steeped in silence. My hands gripped the steering wheel as my thoughts grew heavier. The lightness I had felt during our walk was now replaced by a creeping realization. We had gone too far. My heart was gripped by anxiety, yet instead of slowing down, it raced faster with every memory of his words, his gaze. Aiden sat next to me, staring out of the window. I noticed his gaze occasionally drifting toward me, but he said nothing. Perhaps he, too, understood the precarious edge we were teetering on. Thank you for today, he said as we pulled up to the house. You're welcome, I replied, trying to keep my tone casual. But as he stepped out of the car and walked toward the house, I realized the calmness was just an illusion. We both knew this wasn't the end. That evening, I sat in my bedroom for a long time, replaying the events of the day in my mind. I tried to convince myself that it could stop here. Just step back a little, avoid provoking further encounters, limit interactions to rare, casual exchanges. It was the only sensible solution. The next day, I made a conscious effort to avoid Aiden. I invented 100 small tasks to keep myself busy, leaving no room for chance encounters. But my attempts to create distance only heightened the tension. Each time I passed his room or heard his voice from the other end of the house, something inside me tightened. That evening, I received the first message. Aiden, did you have a good day? I stared at the screen, hesitating. Should I respond or leave it unanswered? But deep down, I already knew I would reply. Me. Yes. And you? That was the beginning. The next day, he messaged again. And then, again. His messages grew more personal, more intimate. He wrote about how he thought of me, how he replayed memories of our walk. Every word was laced with longing and desire, emotions I felt too, but was terrified to acknowledge. I tried to keep my responses measured, restricting myself to brief phrases. But each message from him stirred a wave of emotion within me. My restraint seemed only to fuel his desire, turning it into an obsession that neither of us could escape. The situation became more complicated when Nathan returned from his business trip. He entered the house with his usual demeanor, but his sharp eyes landed on me almost immediately. You look different, he remarked over dinner. More alive. Have you taken up a new hobby? Maybe, I said, keeping my voice steady. I've just been trying to stay busy while you were away. He nodded, but I could see the shadow of suspicion lingering. And Aiden. What's he been up to all this time? Nathan suddenly asked, lifting a spoonful of soup to his mouth. Studying, I think, I replied, avoiding his gaze. He spent a lot of time in his room. We should check in with him, Nathan said thoughtfully, his eyes narrowing as they focused on me. After all, he's our guest. My heart raced. His words were casual, but a warning bell rang inside me. I knew I had to be extremely careful. That night, another message came from Aiden. Aiden, I can't stop thinking about you. It's driving me crazy. I stared at the screen for a long time, unsure of how to respond. His words were raw, honest, but they also revealed the depth of his struggle to contain his feelings. This was dangerous. Far too dangerous. Me. We need to be more careful. His reply came almost instantly. Aiden. Savannah, I can't. I don't care what happens. I just want to be with you. His words shook me to my core. I turned off my phone and lay in bed, but sleep wouldn't come. His growing obsession was becoming impossible to ignore, and I knew it wouldn't remain hidden for long. Nathan was too perceptive not to notice the changes, and I was too deeply entangled in this to find a way out. The morning began with a message from Aiden. His proposal was brief but direct. Aiden, let's meet at the hotel. No one will see us there. I stared at the screen, feeling everything inside me turn upside down. This was more than just dangerous. It was a step neither of us could afford to take. Yet, despite my doubts, I knew I had already made my choice. I told Nathan I was going into town for some shopping, and his lack of interest in my words was both a relief and a burden. He didn't even look up as I left, engrossed in his work. On one hand, it gave me freedom. On the other, it reminded me why I had ended up in this situation. Aiden was waiting for me at the entrance to a small hotel in the city center. He looked tense, but determined. When I approached, he met me with a gaze that spoke louder than any words. Are you sure? He asked, though I could see his question was more of a formality. No, I answered honestly, but I'm here anyway. The room's atmosphere was both intimate and heavy. We sat on the edge of the bed, the first few minutes filled with awkward silence. This place, this moment, everything about it underscored how far we had gone. I can't lose you, he finally said, breaking the silence. His voice trembled, but there was a steadiness in it that I hadn't noticed before. I know this is wrong, but I can't do otherwise. I looked at him, feeling his words cut into me. Aiden, I began, trying to speak calmly, even though a storm raged inside me. You have to understand. This can't be more than this. We just can't. Why? Because it's the right thing to do? He interrupted, his voice sharp. Or because you're afraid? I looked away, unable to answer. Everything he said was true. I was afraid of destroying what I had built over the years. But even more, I was afraid that he was right, and that my feelings for him had grown stronger than I was willing to admit. Aiden reached out, gently touching my cheek. His touch was soft, but there was persistence in it. Savannah, I know how you feel. This is more than just desire. I looked at him, and our eyes met. In that moment, I realized he saw right through me, and that scared me the most. When we returned to the familiar world, the tension between us became almost unbearable. I tried to act as if everything was normal, but Aiden increasingly crossed boundaries. His messages grew more personal, his glances more blatant. But the hardest part was hiding it all from Nathan. One evening, while I was washing dishes in the kitchen, he walked in with my phone in his hand. Someone called you, he said, handing me the device. I didn't get to answer. I took the phone, trying not to let panic show. It was Aiden. His name had flashed on the screen, and I quickly pressed the button to clear the notification. Probably a random call, I said, my voice betraying a slight tremor. Maybe from the store I visited today. Nathan said nothing, but his gaze lingered on me longer than usual. He didn't ask any questions, but something in his eyes made me uneasy. That night, I couldn't sleep. Lying next to Nathan, I replayed the events of the day in my mind. Meeting Aiden at the hotel was a moment that changed everything. It was no longer just a game, it had become real. I knew our connection was doomed to remain a secret, but I also knew that retreating was no longer an option. Aiden approached me after dinner, while Nathan was engrossed in his phone. He appeared calm, but there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Determination. I knew something had changed. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly, trying not to draw attention. I nodded and followed him into the garden. The sky was darkening, and the soft glow of the outdoor lights made his face look even more serious. We stopped by an old bench, and he turned to me. "I think it's time for me to leave," he said bluntly. His voice was steady, but I could hear the weight behind it. "Leave?" I felt something inside me break. "Why? You planned to stay until the end of summer." "This has become too hard," he sighed, lowering his gaze. "I kept telling myself I could handle it, but that's not true. Every day it gets harder. I can't do this anymore." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but I stayed silent. His words were honest, and I knew he was right. Our connection, which had once been a lifeline, had now become a danger. I saw how he struggled with it, and I understood that his decision wasn't a sign of weakness, but an act of protection. "You're doing this for me, aren't you?" I asked quietly, meeting his gaze. He didn't answer immediately, but his eyes told me everything I needed to know. "I don't want you to get hurt," he finally said, "or for this to ruin your life. I'm not leaving because I don't want to be with you, but because I can't let this continue." I lowered my head, feeling tears well up in my eyes. This conversation, the one I had dreaded the most, had become a reality. The next day, he began packing. I tried to stay away, unwilling to see the suitcases fill with his belongings. But in the evening, when Nathan was once again late at work, Aiden came to me. "Can I say goodbye?" he asked, his voice soft but resolute. We stepped out onto the terrace. The wind played with my hair, and the soft light from the lantern illuminated his face. He stood a few steps away from me, not moving closer, but his presence seemed to fill the space around us. "I'll never forget you," he said, his voice filled with both bitterness and tenderness. "Not a single moment, not a single word." I couldn't hold back the tears. They streamed down my face, and I didn't try to hide them. "I won't forget you either, Aiden," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You made me feel alive. But I can't ask you to stay. That would be wrong." He nodded. His eyes shimmering with tears, he fought to hold back. He took a step forward, but didn't come too close. "Thank you for everything, Savannah," he whispered. "Goodbye." I stood frozen as he turned and walked away. I heard the door to his room close, and then there was silence. The goodbye tore me apart inside, but I knew it was for the best. When Nathan returned, he found me sitting in the living room. I was trying to read a book but couldn't focus. He came over, wrapped his arms around me, and kissed my forehead. "How was your day?" he asked, sitting down beside me. "It was fine," I replied, trying to sound sincere. He didn't notice anything unusual, but his closeness reminded me that our relationship still existed. It was different, more complicated, more fragile. But in that moment, I felt that, despite everything, I was still holding on to it. To him, to our family. I looked up at Nathan and smiled. In that smile, there was everything: gratitude, sadness, and perhaps a faint hope that I could leave the past behind. Several weeks had passed since Aiden left. The house was once again filled with its familiar quiet. Life had returned to its ordinary rhythm, but I no longer felt the same. Something inside me had changed. It was like a wound that had healed, but still ached faintly as a reminder. I woke up each morning, prepared breakfast, and greeted Nathan when he came home from work. On the surface, everything seemed as though nothing had happened, but my thoughts often wandered back to the moments Aiden and I had shared. I didn't try to push them away. They had become a part of me, like a warm light that could no longer be reclaimed, but continued to offer comfort in memory. One evening, Nathan made an unexpected suggestion. How would you feel about taking a vacation together? His voice was calm, but I caught a hint of vulnerability in it. I feel like we've grown a bit distant. Maybe a trip could help us reconnect. I looked at him, surprised by his openness. His eyes were tired, but they carried something else, a desire to rebuild what we had lost. That sounds like a good idea, I replied, trying to infuse my words with sincerity. It's been a long time since we spent quality time together. His expression softened slightly, and I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this really was a chance to start over. I knew my heart wasn't entirely his yet, but I was willing to try. It was the best I could offer for both of us. That night, long after Nathan had fallen asleep, my phone gave a quiet chime. I reached for it on the nightstand and saw the sender's name. It was Aiden. Aiden, thank you for everything. You've changed me. I'll never forget you. My heart clenched. I stared at the screen, tears welling up in my eyes. This was his goodbye, final and irrevocable. I typed a short reply. Me. And I'll never forget you. Take care, Aiden. Then I deleted the message, but I couldn't let go of the phone. His words echoed in my mind. I got up, walked to the fireplace in the living room, and threw the phone into the flames, letting it burn. It was my way of saying goodbye. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter. My past with Aiden would stay with me, but it was now just a memory. It had taught me to appreciate fleeting moments and reminded me of the importance of feeling alive. But it would no longer dictate my life. When I came downstairs to the kitchen, Nathan was already there with a cup of coffee. He looked at me with a gentle smile. Ready for our trip? He asked. More than ready, I replied, feeling a renewed sense of purpose, a desire to live, to love, and to be fully present. Life moved on, and I was ready to embrace it as it was,